Okay, everybody, welcome to the Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. For any of you joining us for the first time, selling is hard, and the goal with the show is to try to bring the leading experts in selling to you to try to make what is a hard process a little bit easier. And today, our guest may know more about selling in the travel and transportation space than maybe anyone. Glenn Hollister is Vice President of Sales Strategy and Effectiveness at United Airlines. Prior to United, Glenn was a partner at ZS Associates, which is where he and I met. And he led the travel and transportation practice there. And I'd be remiss also if I didn't mention that Glenn is a West Point grad, and before getting multiple master's degrees at Northwestern, served as a military intelligence officer for the Army. So Glenn, welcome to the Hard Sell.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Joel.
Well, it's great to chat with you again. I maybe just sort of start with telling us a little bit about your role at United Airlines, and then we're going to get right into the questions.
Sure thing, Joel. So here at United, like most companies in the travel world, when we say sales, what really you mean is business to business. And so we have a sales force, of course, that covers our business to business customers. But we have everything else that goes along with that as well. And that everything else is most of what I'm responsible for. So that includes our B2B marketing, our customer analytics, our product design, and our pricing of those products. It includes our B2B service team, all the systems that are needed to keep all that running. And then I also have a few sales teams that report to me as well. So our distribution sales team, and our inside sales and our business development teams all report to me as well. So that's the scope of my responsibility. What I don't have, right, are your traditional field sales, right? Those the field sales leaders all report to my boss, who's the head of worldwide sales.
Right, got it. So, so a lot of different pieces going on in that role, and I think you're maybe in an interesting spot to comment on some trends. And obviously everybody's been affected by COVID. Sellers have had their motions interrupted. Marketers, like everyone, sort of had to operate a little bit differently. And I'm curious how that's played out for United, but also you're maybe doubly impacted in the sense that like your product has been affected by this as well. And so I'm curious about what's it been like for the organization there as we've gone through COVID, and how have you guys sort of adapted?
Sure, and maybe to answer that, I'll break that into two pieces, right? How we sell and what we sell. And the how we sell is probably going to sound familiar to many people, right? Because pre-pandemic, the majority of our sales motion was face-to-face, right? That was our typical mode of selling, was we would go see our customers or our channel partners face-to-face and have a discussion about whatever it was we needed to talk about. And that, similar to everyone, that came to a screeching halt around, May 13th of 2020. And so we quickly adapted to not just phone, but we went through a period, probably like most organizations, of do we use Zoom? Do we use WebEx? Do we use Google Meet? Do we use Teams? And our organization eventually settled on one of those and got very adept at meeting with customers through that mode of communication. And that probably sounds familiar to most people in the sales world. What was maybe a little different is what we sell, right? So traditionally what we sell are contractual relationships where we exchange discounts on air service for a disproportionate share of our customers' travel business. So as travel went to virtually zero, that was no longer at all relevant. And so what our sales team really pivoted to focus on was understanding our customers' barriers to travel and helping them understand what we were doing to overcome those barriers. And that early on was, very basic things about what flights were actually flying. Was it possible to get places? And then on to cleanliness, and more recently on to things about, especially in international travel, how do I navigate what has become a really complex process of traveling internationally, right? Do I need a test? When do I need it? What kind of test? Where and how do I send the results? All those kinds of things are really the things that our sales team has been working with our customers and our channel partners to guide them through that kind of very complex process and help them understand everything United Airlines is doing in order to facilitate travel in this new environment. The other thing that our sales team has done is to really bring the overall message of United, right, which has been a message around industry leadership, right? We were the first ones to commit to masks on planes. We were the first ones to commit to cleaning planes between every flight. We were the first airline to create a website to guide people step through the entire travel process. And there's many more things I could talk about. But that was also a large part of what our sales team was doing, is because we were the first airline to do many things, was taking those things to our customers and helping them understand what that meant to them.
Right. And so, if I'm understanding you, like what success used to look like before was you're, essentially either trying to take share or sort of maintain share of somebody's spend of wall. But
Yeah.
in this new world, it's like, okay, well, can we just get any share? Is there, or even get somebody to travel at all, whereas they might not be willing or they were uncomfortable traveling?
Yeah, I think it's that second way you phrase that is pretty accurate, right? Like people, even now, there's a good number of people who have a lot of trepidation about travel, right? If you haven't traveled since the pandemic started, you really have no idea what it's like. The reality is that travel today, domestically, honestly feels almost exactly like it did pre-pandemic, except that everyone's wearing a mask in the airport and on the plane. Other than that, you will not find a lot of differences between today and pre-pandemic. Internationally, there are all these kind of additional regulatory or compliance things that people need to be aware of, but we've gotten really good at helping people through that. And so we're very much in a mode where there's a lot of pent up demand for travel. We see that whenever travel restrictions are relaxed, that there's a whole surge of people traveling. And what we're really focused on as a sales team is helping our customers understand that you don't actually have to wait to travel if like you can release that pent up demand for travel today. You don't need to wait for some magic moment when the pandemic is declared over or something, right? Which may never happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, let's hope either it it fades out with a whimper,
Yeah.
or maybe we can declare it over. But I think you're right. Yeah, it's like waiting for somebody to say like it's safe is probably that's probably going to be tough. Now, you mentioned international travel, and this is maybe a little bit of a different question, but you guys have a global sales organization. You've got sort of it's obviously a global company, and so you're doing business in all different parts of the world. Have you seen any changes in maybe how different countries are coming back, or how the sales team has approached some of these conversations in one part of the world versus another, or is it pretty much the same?
I think there's a few differences we have seen, right? The first has to do with the programs that different governments have to support the economy through the pandemic, right? And here in the United States, a lot of people are familiar with the way the government support worked is the government paid a portion of the paychecks for workers at airlines and other industries, and those workers kept on working. What happened in a number of other countries, and particularly in Europe, was that the government will come in and say, hey, we'll pay, for example, 4 days a week of this person's wages, but those 4 days of the week, they can't work for you. They can only work the one day a week when the company is paying.
Huh.
And so that created a really interesting situation in many places of the world where both our sales team and our partner sales team, whether that's channel partners or partner airlines, uh, were not working most of the time. And so that was something we had to figure out how to navigate and how to get things done with what was effectively a dramatically smaller workforce in those countries, at least temporarily. So that's definitely one difference we've seen. The other difference we've seen is very different takes on the whole subject of, do people work from an office? And there are countries, so for example, in Asia, we saw not just our team, but many of our customers, there was a really heavy emphasis on getting back to the office as soon as possible. And being in the office is quite common in a number of areas in Asia. Uh, and conversely, when we look at things such as, are people going to become full-time remote workers? Are they going to be hybrid office and remote? Um, in some countries, there's rules around, if someone works from home, there's significant tax implications of that. And so we have countries where, even though our employees and as a company we think it might be a good idea to work remotely, the tax laws make that really burdensome, and so those people are going to continue working from an office, which is probably not what we're going to do for most of the company.
That's really fascinating. I especially didn't know the piece about um, where some of the subsidies actually in some ways prevented people from working. That it's I would not have guessed that. I guess my thought would have been there's a lot of cultural differences. I wouldn't have guessed as much of the. Sounds like there's a lot of like government and regulatory interventions that are changing the way that you operate.
Yeah, that's certainly true both on the workforce side with how various governments support their workforce, but even more dramatically, right, are just all the various border restrictions. And I think one thing that many people, both in the travel industry and just people who travel, have noted is that is it's become very complex to travel internationally because every country has its own version of who needs to take a test, when do they need to take it, what kind of test, what kind of proof do you need. And so that is something we're working really hard on, both from the standpoint of helping our customers understanding the rules that are in place today. Even if those rules change in the middle of their trip, we have ways to inform them that they've changed and get them support to do whatever they need. The other thing is obviously working through our government affairs team and through industry bodies to try to get more consistency across countries and borders to make it a more uniform and more hassle-free experience.
Sounds like a Herculean task. So how do you does that like how does that then impact the sales team? So I think you mentioned earlier that the sales team is now trying to help people figure some of these things out. Is that you're having to sort of build tools that then the sales team can use, or it's customer facing tools that the sales team helps customers sort of navigate and figure out how to, sort of teach them how to fish type of thing, or how does that sort of
Yeah,
work?
it's more the second one. So we as a company have built something that is called the Travel Ready Center. And as soon as you have a ticket, you can go into the Travel Ready Center and it tells you, based on where you live, where you're going to, your passports, your vaccination status, anything else. It tells you what you need to do. And it's a really comprehensive tool. It's, we think, the leading one in the industry. It even gets to the point of, like, if I need a test, it helps you schedule it. If you go to that location, get your test done, results get uploaded automatically. So we've built a lot of functionality into the Travel Ready Center, more functionality than any other airline has. And so a big part of our sales team task has been to explain that functionality to customers and help them understand that by buying a ticket on United, you're also buying a guided process through the entire travel experience that makes it much easier and error free.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And what, it may be too early to speculate on this, but, have you started to see things picking up at all from the business travel perspective, or are things still sort of how they've been?
Yeah, things are there. I would say there's a significant amount of business travel today, and it fluctuates with the various waves of the pandemic and just typical seasonality. But we roughly see about half the normal number of business travelers as we did pre-pandemic right now. So that's there's a significant number of business travelers out there, and there is a fair amount of business travel happening. But we also see that when travel restrictions are eased or lifted, there's a huge surge in business travel. So, for example, we recently saw a significant reduction in the travel restrictions to go to and from the United Kingdom, and that has resulted in a dramatic increase in the number of bookings we're seeing for that destination. And that's a very typical pattern we see. Even domestically with places like Hawaii that at times have had significant restrictions, right? When those restrictions ease, we see a big jump up in bookings.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I imagine the the percentage of leisure versus business travelers is more dynamic now than it probably has been before all this craziness.
It is, but in general, leisure travel is at or above 2019 levels now, right? So
Wow.
it's really the business travel piece that has not returned. And it's a little bit of an interesting dynamic, right? Because you have people who have still not traveled for work, but they have maybe taken two, three, four, five personal trips in that time.
Yeah.
So that's also an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to my next question, which is, kind of from where you sit, as someone who, is helping drive effectiveness across a large global sales organization, but also is, in many ways, very plugged into some of the enablers of how sales gets done in terms of in person. Like, do you think that things will go back to the way they were before? Or do you think they're permanently changed? And like, how do you think, if you think things are sort of changed, like, how do you think things are going to play out from here?
That's a great question, and I have to admit my crystal ball is a little fuzzy on that one, but I'll certainly give you my opinion or my best guess, whatever you want to call it. And I do think there is a permanent change in how field sales forces are going to sell. And I think it's due to through the pandemic, we have learned both the value and impact of selling in person and also the costs of doing so. And I think when I think about, historically as a sales team, right, we did as if we could do it in person, we did. And I think that, when we get past the pandemic here, I think what we're going to see is not just reflexively doing everything in person, maybe doing things by phone or by video when it's a relatively simple thing. But conversely, when we're doing it in person, being more purposeful and trying to uh, use that not just to have a discussion, but to do the things that are really hard to do if you aren't face to face, right? Building the relationships, building the trust, getting a good exchange of understanding, right? So that I think we'll be much more purposeful in the future about our face to face interactions and making sure we get the most out of them, even if that means those face to face interactions take longer or we have to put more effort into and resources into those face to face interactions.
Right. Yeah, I think that last bit's an important point. This has come up on the podcast before as we've talked about this subject, which is this idea that I think buyers are going to be more demanding of what's of sort of the value exchange that happens in an in-person meeting, because now I think buyers have also recognized that it's maybe more expensive for them in some ways to do in person, and so I think like the what the sales team is going to have to deliver now for someone to say like, yes, this was a good interaction to do in person versus to do on Zoom or some other phone or some other medium, I think has gone up.
I agree. I think it has gone up from the buyer's perspective, and I think at least for probably a majority of our sellers, it's gone up for them too, right? Like, do I really need to drive there and go through all the procedure of getting into office just to sit at a desk with someone for 15 to 30 minutes and have a discussion we could have over Zoom? Probably doesn't make sense. right? But if I'm having a discussion with that person and then I get to meet with their team or their boss, maybe we have a meal, now it's a more valuable and more productive type of sales call.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I sort of wonder if, I suppose you think that a lot of these, activities come natural to salespeople, at least more of the sort of the maybe more stereotypical extroverted type of salesperson. But I wonder to what extent, we've got to learn some of those very basic rapport building skills that used to be so second nature to so many of us that have worked in sales.
Yeah, it's really one thing we have definitely learned is that if you have an already established relationship with a customer, you can get a lot done on Zoom and phone and email. But if you don't have that relationship already, it can be really hard. And that's really the value that a field sales team brings, and being in person is creating the kind of relationship where those lower cost forms of interaction can be really productive.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking of it as sort of some minimum level of trust or communication being established that then makes the remote communications more effective over time. That's interesting. Glenn, we're starting to run out of time here, but I'm gonna see if anybody in the audience has questions, and if they do, we'll take those. Maybe while we're doing that, if anybody wanted to sort of learn more about what you're all up to at United Airlines, or wanted to be in touch, what's the best way to do that?
So the best way to learn about what we're doing is to go to our website, united.com. We have a couple of tools there. If you're just looking to travel, the best one is the map. And in the map, you can kind of put in, what kind of passport you have and vaccination status, and it'll tell you where you can go. And then if you have a ticket on United, again, I really recommend the Travel Ready Center. There will be a button on that both on the website or on the app. And so those are good ways to explore what is possible and what's needed to travel today. In terms of our business offerings, the main place for that is united.business. And there you'll see the range of offerings we have for business customers.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. It looks like you've. Well, there might be one question here. Zoe's got a question. She's asking where you're flying to next.
So I think my next flight is to Newark next week, and then the week after that, I am going to London for 4 days to do a series of customer meetings.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I got a trip to Utah coming up in a couple of days, which I'm looking forward to. Hopefully, we'll actually be able to make it through the mountain pass to Snowbird this time. The last time I was there, pre-pandemic, we couldn't make it there. So hopefully this will work this
Yeah, well,
time. But
good luck on that. Yeah, I was out in Colorado skiing last week, so
nice, nice. So, all right. Well, Glenn, it was great to catch up, and thanks for being a guest on the show. And we'll talk to you soon.
great. Thanks for having me, Joel.
Okay.